Good morning, and welcome to Doris Buntè Apartments. Good night, Frank. I'm delighted to be here today to honor a mentor, an old family friend of almost 50 years now, my boss, and quite frankly, many people at the BHA still consider Doris my boss. And I am one of them. Everybody at the BHA knows we do not say no to Doris. So let's get rolling. Our first speaker is certainly a very familiar face to those of us in Greater Boston, and it is appropriate that we start out today's program with an invocation from Reverend Liz Walker. Reverend Walker.
Let's all take a deep breath and let it out, and let us pray. Mighty and merciful God, we thank you for this gathering today, the celebration of a community institution, a drum major for justice, a sister warrior who has served this community and the world with all her heart, intellect, body, and soul. A woman whose name is synonymous with righteousness and justice, a voice for the voiceless, and one who always speaks truth to power. For every battle she fought, for every challenge she faced, for every life she changed, for every home she helped create, for every family she sheltered and nourished and inspired, we thank you. We pray for her continued strength and endurance, that she will be filled with your peace and love, and that her work to make this world better will continue in every step she takes, in any direction she heads. Lord, we pray for all of those whose shoulders on which we stand today, those who have worked and fought and sacrificed for us, all of those who will come after us. We owe them a debt of gratitude that we may never fully repay, and we ask you to bless them. We thank you for all of those who still serve us and those who are yet to come. We ask for your wisdom in giving them the resolve and courage to take the right action against increasingly complex and evil adversaries. We pray for these communities, Lord, for all of those whom we serve, for those who work and those who are without work, for those who are well housed and those who are homeless, for those who have purpose and those who are confused. Bless everything that happens here this morning, all that is said and promised, and give us all a sense of renewed passion and purpose, courage and care, that we may move onward and upward with wisdom and grace. In the name of all that we hold holy, for me that is Jesus Christ, let the people of God together say, Amen. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. Well said. Amen. Our first speaker is our mayor. I have been pleased and proud to have served as his administrator of the Boston Housing Authority for the past 4 years. I want to thank him for his encouragement, his moral support, and for his financial support. We currently have, it's always, that helps. Yeah, right, yeah, right.
Get straight to the point.
Right, yeah, right. Yeah. We currently have about 4,000 units of public housing either under rehabilitation or in the planning stages to preserve another 4,000 units of deeply affordable public housing for future generations of residents of our city that are so desperately in need of affordable housing. Please, a very warm welcome for my dear friend, Mayor Marty Walsh.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. And I want to just thank Bill. He's been an incredible leader here at the Housing Authority, and we've been able to do a lot of renovations. We've been able to make a lot of investments because of his years of experience here and his passion and dedication to housing. So I want to thank Billy and the entire team at the Boston Housing Authority who work extremely hard every single day for the residents. I want to thank the residents for allowing us in your home today.
Yes.
I want to thank you for letting us come here and do this incredible opportunity, this renaming of this great building. I want to thank all the residents. I was here probably several months ago. We were here, we were talking about the different issues, and I want to thank you as well for letting us here today. Reverend Walker, I want to thank you for your prayers and your words, and thank you for everything you do in our city every single day. I don't know if Mel King's here yet, but I want to thank Mel. Mel's going to be here. I think he's on his way. I want to thank Mel King, Anna Mae Cole, the tenant leader, and all the tenants. Thank you very much as well, all the residents. I want to give a couple shout-outs. I know we're going to have a big, long speaking program today, but I want to give a couple shout-outs. I want to thank Representative Byron Rushing, who I served in the House of Representatives with, for being here today. The President of the Boston City Council, Andrea Campbell's here. Thank you, Madam President, for being here. Our Congressman Mike Capuano's here. Thank you, Congressman. Former City Councilor Charles Yancey's here today. Thank you, Charles. I want to thank the press that's here as well, and obviously, Doris, I want to thank you as well for being here with us today. And I want to thank Doris for all that she's done for the people of Boston. Throughout her life and career, she's made an incredible impact on our community and our city. She's inspired many of us in public service. I'm proud of the fact that my connection to Doris is that we both served in a great branch of government, the Massachusetts legislature. And once you're a member of that, there's a connection there. So long before I knew who Doris Buntè was, when I got elected, there was a connection there, and I'm proud of that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But today, we're certainly carrying on your legacy, fighting for equity in our neighborhoods and affordable housing, and I want to thank you as well. Doris is a tireless advocate. Anyone who knows her, she's never stopped pushing and fighting for people. About 3 weeks ago, I was summoned to her apartment after she was trying to get me, and when I got to the apartment, it wasn't, "Oh, Mayor, thanks for being here." It was like, "It took you long enough to get here." And she was advocating for the sick and suffering alcoholic and drug addicts, is what she was doing that day, and so many other people. So I want to thank you for that. Doris, as many of you in this room know, and if you don't know, she's broken new ground every single step of the way. She was the first African-American woman to be elected to the Massachusetts State Legislature. That was an incredible accomplishment when she did it. She was the first African-American woman to lead the Boston Housing Authority. There was a lot of conversations during the presidential election that Hillary Clinton was going to be breaking glass ceilings. Doris has been breaking glass ceilings for a long, long time. But when she did her work, whether it was as a representative or an administrator, she didn't do it as an administrator or as a representative. She did it as a neighbor. She understands the hopes and dreams of people living in public housing because she lived there. She oversaw the Boston Housing Authority desegregation. She created powerful programs like Youth on the Rise. This past weekend, we were at the Mildred Haley Apartments, and we were giving sneakers to the young people because we have an uptick in violence, and some of the programs that she started we're still carrying on today in the Boston Housing Authority, helping young people have better pathways and better successes in their life. Doris helped show the quality of public housing is a stepping stone, and that it can make all the difference for so many people. She talked about housing, how it has the opportunity to transform lives and lift up communities. This rededication of the Doris Buntè Apartments is a fitting tribute to an incredible woman. And we continue to honor her legacy every day in the city by making investments throughout Roxbury, which I'll talk about. But my first real conversation with Doris Buntè happened sometime in 2013 when I was running for mayor of Boston. She was living over in Harbor Point, Columbia Point, and I had a chance to talk to her about my candidacy for mayor. We immediately hit it off because of the connection, I think, as a legislator and growing up in Dorchester and growing up in Roxbury and growing up in the city. And she has been, to me, a mentor in some sorts of ways. Throughout the mayoral campaign, helping me with advice. It wasn't her endorsement, it was what she said to me, talking about caring about the people. And I've had a chance to watch her now for the last 5 years, and I know that she will probably get up here and say she's not in the best of health, but she gets more things done in the course of a day than most people do that are healthy. She cares about people. She cares about people, and this is such a fitting tribute today. And again, I want to thank Billy McGonigal, who talked about this. But what Doris's legacy has left us, just so you, meaning what her work has done, her legacy. Just last month, we broke ground on the Whittier Street housing development. That was money we got from President Obama on the way out the door. Literally the last day he sent us a check. I want to thank you, Mr. President, for that, because if you didn't get it, the other guy probably would have stopped it on us. But Doris fought to make sure people live with dignity. And her legacy is in the office that Billy holds today, something that's important. It's allowing us to achieve a vision for Roxbury, more high-quality, affordable housing, safer streets, better internet service, bringing the 21st century into the buildings here, so young people can get the opportunity, and everybody has the opportunity to expand and get onto the internet and explore the world. More open spaces. We're excited to begin work on the Lenox and Camden, Amory Street, Haley Apartments as well. All of these different buildings and developments are getting facelifts or upgrades and eventually going to be reconstructed. Doris laid down that foundation. Housing is the foundation, but it goes far beyond that. It's also about education. In Roxbury, we built the first new high school in a generation right here in Roxbury, the Dearborn STEM Academy. Something, again, that Doris laid down the foundation as a legislator, and workings that myself and Andrea and Byron have to continue that mantle of fighting for more opportunities. It's about resources, renovating the Dudley Square Library, and making sure the community has the access of the same as the Copley Square Library in downtown Boston. It's about infrastructure, and we're in the process now of beginning the reconstruction of Quincy Street. It's about public spaces and the renovating of the BCYF Vine Street Community Center. In all of this work, we stand on the shoulders of people like Doris Buntè. We are grateful for all she's done and we're committed to making her proud as a city. I want to congratulations to the residents of the Doris Buntè Apartments. I want to say thank you for that. And I want to thank you for celebrating this morning with us. And to Doris, I want to just say, this to me is one of the highest honors anyone can get. Because as people drive by this building and they see your name out in the front, and in time when they research who you are and what you are all about, they're going to realize that, as I said earlier, you broke a lot of glass ceilings for the opportunity for people like Andrea Campbell to run for city council and become the president of city council. People like Byron Rushing and other folks who were there. So thank you, Doris. And the only thing I regret today is I can't stay for the unveiling because I have to give a speech at the Municipal Research Bureau, unfortunately. But you're the best. I love you, and the city of Boston loves you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whoa, my goodness. Dropped the mic. Okay. Our next speaker. I'm delighted he was able to make it. He's up from Washington for a 2-week recess, and someone who in Washington has been a very strong and profound voice, unwavering voice on behalf of public housing and those in need of affordable housing for many, many years now. Please, a warm welcome for our Congressman Michael Capuano.
I'm glad you're alive to see this, Doris.
Yeah. I am.
And you know, you've been to 1,000 of these types of things, and usually the people being on it are no longer with us. And I will tell you that you earned it. I started working at the State House in 1976, and by that time you were already a giant. And people like you were living proof every single day that regular people can make a difference. And I know you've been an inspiration to a lot of people in the political life, but the truth is you've also been an inspiration to a lot of people that are not in politics. It's important to stand up for what you think is right. It's important to fight for it. It's important to be pleasant. Doris sometimes is not pleasant. But more often than not, she is, and she usually becomes unpleasant after you've said no, which, of course, no one in their right mind would do.
Correct.
The mayor said it all about the details, but for me, Doris Buntè embodies everything that's right about growing up in a community and giving back. I'm always telling people there's 1,000 ways to give back. Politics is one way, but there's 1,000 other ways to do it, and there's no one way. You do what you can. Doris Buntè's done what she can every step of life. That's incredible. And I wanted to be here just for a moment to share this moment with you, Doris, and to express my personal appreciation for the guidance and leadership you've provided, not just me, but so many people. I will tell you that your legacy, yeah, it's a building, and that's wonderful, and it's housing, but it's more, for me, more about activism, more about seeing things that need to be fixed and doing what you can to fix them. You've done an incredible job your entire life. You deserve this recognition and a lot more. Thank you for giving us.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next speaker is a long-term member of the House of Representatives. As the mayor said, the mayor there served with Doris when she was a state legislature, and a great voice in this city for social and economic justice, and one of Boston's great historians. Please, a warm welcome for Byron Rushing.
This is indeed a privilege for me to be able to talk about Doris and not have her talk back. Several years ago, when Mel King decided not to stand for re-election because he wanted to concentrate on running for mayor of Boston, I and some other people let it be known that I would be interested in running for that seat, and I got a call from Doris. Those of you who remember those days will know where we met. We met at the Red Fez, when there was a Red Fez, a real Red Fez. And I knew that conversation was the conversation. And all the rest of my history started there, with her support. Let me say two things. First thing is about the big housing picture. We are privileged because of Doris's work and of Harry Spence's work, that we are one of the few major cities in the United States that has as much public housing units today as we had 20 years ago, as we had 30 years ago, as we had 40 years ago. Public housing was the greatest invention in the United States for providing affordable housing. We have never come up with an alternative that has been as efficient and as steady a source of affordable housing as public housing. Thank Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yep.
There are only two ways to have affordable housing in this city, in this state, and in America. And one way is to own, for the government to own public housing available to everyone who needs it and is available through as many units as possible. Every other solution has been phony. That's why we have to struggle to try to keep them going, to try to keep them not getting sold to somebody else. And of course, the final solution for affordable housing is to end poverty and everybody be rich enough that they can rent anywhere they want to. Doris Buntè is part of that tradition for us here. And finally, to Doris. Most of us in this room know the song, Lift Every Voice and Sing. I won't ask you to prove it by singing it now. Lift Every Voice and Sing was written by James Weldon Johnson over 100 years ago, and it was written for one occasion. The only job he could get after getting his PhD was to be a principal of a segregated high school in Florida. And that high school was going to celebrate Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And you can imagine in the South, in 1900, the only people who celebrated Abraham Lincoln's birthday were black people. And he had invited this young speaker to come to the high school. And so he wanted to do something special for them, for that person. And so he wrote this song for the high school, all the pupils in that high school to sing. And when Booker T. Washington was introduced to talk to the students at that high school, they all stood and sang Lift Every Voice and Sing. And James Weldon Johnson didn't think about it again. And of course, 20 or 30 years ago, everyone was singing it. It was the Negro national anthem. Right? We wouldn't meet like this 50 years ago without, at the beginning or the end of this ceremony, singing Lift Every Voice and Sing. And in his autobiography, he talks about the fact of realizing how that song had become so popular in the black community. And he and his brother reminisced about writing it for the first time for a one-time occasion. And James Weldon Johnson said, "We realized that we had written better than we knew." Everything that you hear today, Doris, remember, you have done this work. You have written better than you know.
We lost a trailblazer last evening. I don't know how many of you folks have heard, but Linda Brown passed away last night at 76. The plaintiff in Brown v. the Board of Education. If we could have a moment of silence in her honor, please. Thank you. I'd like to, before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to recognize some of the tenant leaders that are here with us today, many of whom have had long-term relationships with the person that we honor today. Certainly our leaders of our Resident Advisory Board, Val Shelley, Edna Wilrich. We have over our former past president and the current president of the Haley Apartments Task Force here, who are carrying on the legacy of Mildred Haley. Please a warm welcome for Yamilet and Wendy. And I might add that the beautiful red tie I have was a Christmas gift from them, and I only wear it on special occasions. So our next speaker is someone that has had a remarkable public career. Certainly receiver, administrator of the Boston Housing Authority, receiver in Chelsea, chief operating officer for the New York City School Department, and on and on and on. A very illustrious public career where he has served the people of this Commonwealth and this country, and someone that I consider a dear friend and someone that I've had a relationship with for a long time, and someone who was wise enough to hire me at the Boston Housing Authority some 45 years ago, or 40 years ago anyway. Harry Spence.
Thank you, Bill. Bill was one of the initial class of management trainees that a management training program that we started at the Boston Housing Authority, 1982. And I've always thought to myself, that was a good pick. That was a good pick to include Bill in that class. When you invite somebody as old as me to come back and speak, I hate to say it, but one of the reasons is to place this event in history. To first place this event in history, let me just say that when you honor a giant such as Doris, you draw giants such as Mel King to the occasion. Doris and I do this periodically. We count up how long we've known each other. So on the way down in the car, I counted it up again, and it's 48 years now, Doris. So I'm going to take you back to 1970. In 1970, I was a kid, shortly out of college, working for the Boston Housing Authority as the assistant to the administrator, Dan Finn. And I met the members of the board. In 1970, the board of the Boston Housing Authority was run by what was called the tenant-oriented majority. And it was made up of 3 people. Julius Bernstein, a great labor leader and longtime civil rights advocate, enormously important mensch in the life of Boston. John Connolly, the representative of the Public Housing Association from the Mary Ellen McCormick Apartments, and a classmate of mine at Harvard until he dropped out to do the work. And the third, of course, was Doris Buntè, and I met Doris, who was then had been appointed to the Boston Housing Authority, having led the Orchard Park Tenant Association. That's right. That's right. And that tenant-oriented majority was running the Housing Authority. Well, around that same time, a few months after I arrived, the city under newly elected Mayor Kevin White ran into its first fiscal crisis. And the mayor decided that he could unload some of the senior bureaucrats at City Hall off of the city's budget onto the federal and state budget at the Housing Authority. So Dan Finn dutifully followed the orders of the mayor and submitted to the board the hiring of several bureaucrats from City Hall. And Doris and the tenant-oriented majority asked the question they always asked. What's the benefit to tenants from this action? That's right, long silence. That's right. The benefit all accrued to the mayor. There was no benefit for tenants in this action. So guess what they did? They said no. Ooh. Was Kevin White astonished. Absolutely astonished. It didn't occur to him that somebody might not do what he told them. So he promptly moved to remove John Connolly from the Housing Authority, to break the tenant-oriented majority. Only the next day it turned out that John Connolly was appointed by the governor, not by the mayor. So whoops, slipped on a banana peel. Well, next thing you know, 2 days later or so, the mayor decided it was time to remove Doris Buntè. And he trumped up a set of charges because it turned out that he couldn't just remove her. There was a whole statutory process. It required a trial before the Boston City Council, and the Boston City Council had to vote to remove her. Whoa. So I, by this time, was back in law school, but I was spending my time running down to the city council chambers every day of the hearing to listen to this trial that went on for days. Herb Gleason was the city solicitor, the mayor's lawyer. And as I remember, the mayor got so impatient with Herb's inability to kind of make a case for these trumped up charges, he took over the prosecution himself. He just was so frustrated. And eventually, of course, because, you know, the mayor's left, I can say this now, and the head of the council has. Mayors have a way of being persuasive with the Boston City Council when they really want it. And this mayor really wanted it. And so a majority voted to remove Doris. Well, you know, Kevin White learned what Doris's several illnesses have learned, which is don't ever think you've defeated Doris. Don't ever make the mistake. She's tougher than you are. And with the great representation of an attorney, Ed Barshak, wonderful, dedicated lawyer, Doris went to court, and eventually the removal was overturned and justice was done. But in the process, something very important happened. In the process, Kevin had made Doris Buntè into a widely known and deeply respected civic leader of courage, and known for her courage, her persistence, and her integrity. And so, in that way, Kevin White unwittingly helped to be a major support for Doris. That led, of course, to her being the first black woman elected to the Massachusetts state legislature, along with Mel King. And there were all sorts of fights around whether Mel could wear his dashiki in the legislature. You all remember those days. Yeah. So, eventually, 1985, the receivership at the Boston Housing Authority that Judge Paul Garrity had declared and that I'd worked for Paul Garrity on, was beginning to wind down. I told the judge it was time for me to leave, and the question was how to bring the receivership to an end and safely return the housing authority to the administration of the city. And one of the great moments of, you know, how history has moments of just delicious irony. Guess who ran housing policy for the city of Boston from '85 on? The remaining two members of the tenant-oriented majority that Kevin White had sought to remove from the housing authority in 1970. Doris Buntè ran the housing authority, and John Connolly was the housing advisor to the mayor. And so the two of them ensured that public housing moved forward, that, as Byron pointed out, we are a city that still has as many housing units as we've had historically today. We still have those units. And Doris has continued, uninterrupted, unbowed, and at every step of her career has advocated for public housing tenants, for her community, for the city of Boston. And I just want to spend a minute, because I reflected on the qualities that have driven that extraordinary career. There are the obvious ones that I've talked about: courage, persistence, integrity. But there are two others I'd like to mark. One of them is an incisive intellect. An incisive intellect. Doris is smart, just plumb smart. Doris has the ability to look at a situation and figure it out fast, and then to make the right moves to make it happen, to make happen what has to happen. She's not just an advocate, she's a doer. She gets things done. She gets things done. But underneath that intelligence is a second, sometimes less recognized quality. Doris has an extraordinary capacity for human empathy. She deeply, deeply feels the feelings of other human beings. She knows and understands what it feels like to be them. Over that 48 years, I can't tell you how much I've learned from Doris Buntè about human nature in the course of late-night conversations at the Red Fez, in the course of drives, in the course of trips to Washington, in the course of visits recently to her apartment. I continue to learn from her about what makes human beings tick. That quality allowed her to do things like build unexpected alliances. At a time when South Boston was pretty much the declared enemy of Roxbury, Doris understood the representative from South Boston, Mike Flaherty, and found ways to find some common ground on issues that moved both. Doris has been a part of moving forward the relations between persons of color and whites in this city. She has been a crucial step, both a crucial advocate, both for the end to oppression and to building alliances. Building alliances. And those two qualities I just want to mark especially: a profound intelligence and a deep capacity for empathy. So it's entirely appropriate that we name this apartment building, this place, this piece of public housing after Doris Buntè, who has throughout her entire life, with profound compassion, caring, deep understanding, fought for people who needed her advocacy every step of the way. And she continues to this very day. Doris is going to go on and on and on because there's more work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Well said. And I remember a lot of that history. I was very young. No. Doris said to me a couple of weeks ago, she said, "I'm amazed you're old enough to remember that stuff." So, our next speaker, the word icon is tossed around here and there, sometimes appropriately, sometimes inappropriately. But in this instance, it is extraordinarily appropriate. A leader for racial, social, and economic justice in our city, and to a great degree, the conscience of our city. Please, a very, very warm welcome for Mel King. Okay. Yep. Go.
A lot of you here. And when I say a lot of you, I'm talking about people who were here, there, 50 and some 60 years ago. And, you know, you talk about the past. I probably have known Doris longer than anybody else in this room. because we go back to an interesting thing. There was a business over by the Carter Playground, and they were looking to hire some folks. And one of the things we were working on from our standpoint in the community was making sure that local businesses hired some local folks. And we learned that Doris had applied for a job there. And so a few of us went up and talked to the management, et cetera, and Doris got hired. So that was not our first relationship, but I tell you that because she was in the middle of the challenge to make sure that some of the folks who lived in the neighborhood near Carter Field would be able to get jobs in a business that was right there at that area. So she was one of the first persons that I was involved with in making sure there would be access to employment for folks who look like us. And so that's a memory that goes back before the Housing Authority and any of that happened. Now, I'm not going to get into the personal stuff with some of the folks that she was involved with. You've heard a lot, but I want to read a poem that I had written and read at another event at which she was honored. And I thought it would be appropriate to read today. But I want to frame it by having listened to what has been said already, is that the question is always in whose interest. And there is no one who I can think of who has portrayed the level of the interest of the people that she felt were being deprived or in most need. Now, here's one that I'd be surprised if you really knew about, and it's interesting that the housing is going to be named after her. I'm still pushing to get a piece of Roxbury Community College named after her. Now, you may not know how it happened. We were working in the legislature trying to, get educational opportunity and things for folks who look like us as well as others. And we had been talking about a community college. And so the speaker organized his little folks, and they ended up getting a community college in his community. And Doris walked up to him and said, Mr. McGee, or did you call him Tom then? Tommy. Said, you got a community college for your neighborhood here in Lynn. We need to have one in Roxbury. And just like that, Roxbury Community College got in place, and here's the person who made it work. Yeah, and we still got to get a building over there named after her as well, and that's the commitment we all need to make sure that it happens. So I just tell that story because it's another indication of what we call in whose interest. And when you look at Doris, you know that what she does is in the interest of a lot of people in need across this city, and the naming here is as appropriate as anything that could be named after her. The housing, now we got to get the school named after her, and I don't know what else. Now, when asked if I would say something, I thought about some words that I had written in which I had spoken about Doris before. And it's called, Dear Earthling Leader, Doris. We look in the mirror, we see it's you who cares, who loves, who shares, who reaches, who teaches about the gifts of creation, of the ear and the art in earth, of the ear and the art in heart. So we listen and cultivate the gifts from earth's bounty that you work to share. And I want to repeat that. So we listen and cultivate the gifts from earth's bounty that you work to share. So we listen and cultivate the beauty of all earthlings because you care. Dear Earthling Leader, with open arms, embrace the hugs of our earthly love. Doris, we love you, Buntè. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you. I want a hug.
She needs a hug there, Mel.
Oh, well, that's my middle name anyhow, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel. I'd like to recognize a few of our other tenant leaders. Matilda Drayton, a member of our monitoring committee, and the president of Alice Taylor Task Force, Eugenia Smith, who's active in our resident advisory board, active in our monitoring committee, active all over the city. Thank you for being here with us today. Our next speaker, like Doris and Mildred Haley, is one of the matriarchs, if you will, of public housing in the city, a founder with Mildred Haley of the first tenant management corporation in the country. Chairman of the Tenant Management Corporation Board for many, many years. And when her and Mildred took over the day-to-day operations for Bromley Heath, the place was an absolute disaster. I believe 4,000 broken windows. Heat was unreliable. Electricity was unreliable. And they did a magnificent job of self-managing and moving that community to a decent, safe, and livable community where folks respected each other and supported each other. Their longtime saying of "we are family" resonates, I think, with all of us today. Please, I'm very pleased and proud to introduce my old friend, Anna Mae Cole.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so nervous. I'm hearing all the wonderful things and not enough to be said, but I'm honored to be here to share this day with my friend and my partner in the struggle, Doris Buntè, and to see the name and dedication of this building, which people in the community, I never knew it was called Walnut Park. We called it the Roundhouse. I've always known it as the Roundhouse, and when I got an invitation, I says, "Milt, where's the?" He says, the roundhouse. All I can say is, Doris, being an advocate and a supporter of residents and affordable housing, not only in our city and state, but nationally. I met Doris. She didn't become an advocate, you know, a supporter from something she read or heard somebody say. She was a former resident of OP, Orchard Park.
That's right.
And she was on that task force. And I met her at our citywide organization, TPC, Tenant Policy Council. And it was made up of residents from public housing developments across this city. South Boston, East Boston, Faneuil, Cathedral. And we were leaders. We worked together, working with the Housing Authority and working with residents. So it's that advocacy for her moved her on from Tenant Policy Council. She was a commissioner at the Housing Authority and a state legislature. And all I can say is that Doris never removed herself or called herself different from everybody. We were all the same. We were families trying to raise children, raise our families, and we had the same hopes and dreams and fears that everyone else had. In the legislature, Doris was always available. You could see her anytime. And you could talk to her about things. You could propose things to her. And she was honest. She gave you her honest opinion. And if she promised to help you, she would. We're still in the struggle today. And I'm saying now, I've been thinking what I'm going to say, and I don't even know, but I'm saying that our local tenant organizations, that they need to be supported by the residents. And we need to have young people step up to the plate and pick up where Doris is not going to let go, because I know her eyes and ears are open. Anything she hear or see from the legislature, proposed elected officials, I know she's going to be on the phone, she's going to be on her email, and she's going to be voicing her opinion, pro and con. These are perilous days. It's not just a Massachusetts problem, it's a national problem. Funding, our housing authorities are doing a wonderful job with budget cuts all around, and I'm sure losing staff. Years ago, residents knew all the staff people in the BHA because they was out in the community and whatever. People advocate and support affordable housing for many things. One of them, very important, to have your rent based on your income. Have your rent based on your income. I'm going to kind of tell my age a little bit. In years ago, when I was for public housing, in a cold water flat, running hot water and heat, that's what everybody wanted, and housing offered that for families. We lived in places where we had to heat the house from the kitchen stove and a circulator or a coal stove in the front room. Your hot water was a tank attached to the coal cooking stove. Saturday night was bath night for everybody. You threw all the children in the bathtub. They took her back because she had a full tank of hot water. And at night, when you went to sleep in the winter, every blanket and coat in the closet was on the bed to keep you warm at night. All the children slept together, boys and girls, and together. As I said, we're still in the struggle, and we have to keep going and keep moving, because many of our elected officials in Washington, we don't hear a whisper about public housing anymore. We become invisible. We don't hear anything. Our Massachusetts delegation does very well, always did. Joe Moakley, Bonnie Frank, Senator Kennedy, all of them, you could speak to them and they had public housing on their mind. And as I said, our Massachusetts development is representatives, you can are available, but it's a national thing. I write, and I'm telling people, I write everybody. You know, and I know that funding, we used to have the pilgrimages every year going to Washington to walk the halls of Congress and the Senate. Those monies was cut. And I do believe, and I know Doris feels the same way that I do, a lot of things that affect the poor and low income was in discretionary funds. And anytime they felt like cutting, that's where they went. They took it from there. No more pilgrimage trips to Washington. The funds are cut. So we don't go there anymore. I've been writing clapper, narrow, low-income housing, and saying, let's collaborate. Let's collaborate your little bit of monies. If they're smart enough to hack into voter registration, you ought to be smart enough to come up with something and give us a number to read those jokers in Washington and say, I'm a registered voter from Omaha. I'm a registered voter from California. Tweet them. Jam them up. Jam their things, their minds up to let them know that we're not invisible. And one of the things that we have to do for ourselves is we gotta vote. We gotta vote in every election. And all of these, I'm speaking, and I know I'm saying what Doris would be saying if she was standing here. In our public health housing developments, we must vote in both elections. And I've spoken to some of the people who run for our local offices here. And when the elections come, I say, look, collaborate. Collaborate. Get a truck. Get a loudspeaker, get some music, and go in these housing developments and say, vote. Vote for the candidate of your choice. To remind people, we got young mothers working very hard trying to put food on the table on some of these low-paying jobs. You know, there's no youth programs. I can remember with Doris calling together all of the leaders in housing and youth and asked what was the main thing. And the youth showed up and said, we need transportation. Almost every development had a basketball team. And the kids had problems visiting from one community to other, strange, and met confrontations in the public transportation stations. And some way Doris found vans, and those vans transported those children, those boys, from one development to other so that they compete and play basketball together. And doing that brought about friendship, relationships between those boys. When they met on the bus or the train again, it was a smile because they remembered everybody bouncing a ball or doing something. That's how you bring people together and stuff. And so our boys are missing that. We're missing the youth workers. You know, they're making merry with gangs now. We don't have nothing going on with that, so we need to carry on these kind of programs that Doris had, but we need the money to do it. And so we have to band together, our local task forces and everybody, and find ways to connect, you know, because in Washington, they still sometimes toy around with the thing of time limits. You live in public housing, if you don't got a big job or something, in 5 years, out you go and put somebody else in. And I've lived in housing for, this is my 62nd year living in Bromley Heath. I raised a family of 8 in Bromley Heath. At some point, we could have bought a home, but we never made enough to maintain it and upkeep of it. And so it's my home, my family, and I love it. I'm safe there, and I feel a lot of other people here feel the same way about their developments. So let's find some ways to carry on the things that Doris has fought for all these years, and many other of our matriarchs in public housing. Try to collaborate and communicate and write these people and make them find some kind of way that we can communicate with these guys. I see everybody walking around with a thing in their hand and tweeting and Facebook. They develop us a number where we learn how they do it, and not a one-day thing. Every day, somebody's jam up their lines. And their lines are open because we paid the doggone bill and stuff. So, you know, I don't know what else I can say, but all of this is in behalf of someone that I love deeply. Between Doris and my belated friend Mildred Haley, we were more than friends. And I can say that we're friends to relatives, residents, not only in Bromley Heath, nationally. We all have the same fears, the same experiences, and housing is a need. You gotta have that first. To have a place to stay that's safe, and a place to stay that you can afford the rents because we're being moved out. A lot of people who never had anything to do with the city, but they want to come in now and get all the big places, you know, and move us out. Like look at us if we walk the street. What are you doing here? And we've been here all these years in the city. I look at this building, the round building, my goodness, and now calling it Doris Buntè's Apartments. My God, it stands strong and tall. You can see it all over Roxbury. I'm an 85-year-old crossing guard at Denmark and Columbus Avenue, and every day I'm looking at this building, and I'm seeing it, and it's so strong and tall, and you can't miss it. And in the summer, as you go past on the bus or walk past, you see elderly and disabled sitting out with one another, enjoying one another. That's what it's all about. That's what committee advocacy and support is all about. I know I'm rambling on and I'm long-winded, but I have so many things that I feel. I love where I live. I love where I live. 62 years there. Children are grown and got kids of their own that was in my program, my cooking and sewing classes, in the cave, and all of those things. And they recognize me still, and I don't. And when people say not safe, I can walk out any time, day or night, in my development. And somebody, if I got a bag, somebody say, "Hello, Miss Cole, can I carry that bag for you?" And help me like that. So they recognize me. So being visible and being involved and, you know, trying to help and improve, it's safety for you. And you do this because you set examples for your children. And people say that you don't have good kids from public housing. No, sir. I got 8, and they are all wonderful children. Every one of them. I got police officers, I got technicians, I got all of that. I got someone in the Boston Symphony, all of that, public housing and stuff. So this is what we do. We collaborate and help one another with children and be grateful and keep our eyes on what's going on in Washington and the kind of legislations that they try to propose and slip on us. And if we can't get there on the bus, we're going to get them on the phone. We're going to tweet them, and we're going to jam their lines up, you know. And that's not just Massachusetts, California, Florida, wherever. Public housing voters. I think I've run out, and I hope, but I just say, Doris, I love you. I love you. I love you.
One more speaker before we introduce our guest of honor today, but I would like to recognize another person that has been involved in the struggle for decent, safe public housing in the city of Boston for many, many decades. Mac McCrate from GBLS. Mac? And our last speaker before we get to our guest of honor is Doris's grandson, friend, companion, sometimes driver, and all-around handyman, and someone who is there 24/7 for Doris. Please, a warm welcome for Bernard Johnson.
Good afternoon. That coming after Anna Mae is a tough act to follow. I want to say that growing up, Anna Mae and Mildred Haley and my grandmother were like the 3 musketeers. And, you know, listening to the mayor and listening to Harry talk about some of the things that they went through in the beginning, I know that if you sat down with those 3 women, some business was going to get taken care of. And even through the years, you know, watching her and Mel and John and Harry, they're still best friends to this day. And the passion that I just heard from Anna is still alive in my grandmother. I mean, like the mayor talked about, if she got something on her mind, there's going to be a meeting. Now, it used to be at the Red Fez. Now it's probably going to be at Victoria's or at her house. You know, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out to the Hall of Fame ceremony. Oh, no, the building dedication for Doris Buntè. We don't usually get this many friends and family together unless there's a wedding or a funeral. You know, this is quite an honor. And with that being said, you know, this is kind of bittersweet for my grandmother because one of my other grandmothers and her best friend passed within the last 2 weeks, and today we're having a ceremony, 2 days. And so if we could have a moment of silence for Trudy and my Aunt Charlotte, please. Thank you. The reason we're here at this particular location is because part of, you know, as I wrote my speech probably about 10 minutes to 11 over at McDonald's, and then Harry spoke. Harry just took half of my speech away from me. But the reason we're at this location is because one of the things that she did when she got in public housing is to make sure that my grandmother, grandma, who I refer to her, was all set. And she lived in this building. So that's why we're at this location. And I remember one of the stories about, you know, after all that Kevin White stuff with the charges, and then somebody asked her, you know, how could you put your mother in public housing here? She said, because it's my mother. And we take care of one another. And so, and let me back up. My grandmother, grandma, or Evelyn Johnson Brown, was from New York, and she was in the political life there. She did a lot of different things. She was part of the New Deal in the Democratic Party. She was a consultant for the city councilors. She did some things there, and she was actually the first woman, the first black woman to ever have a voting district assigned to her. And back then, you know, when election came, you had a voting machine in your front room. You know what I mean? And I say all that because the seed was planted. You know, the seed was planted. And actually, my grandmother went to school for catering. So if she'd have put all that energy into catering that she's put into public housing, she'd probably be like either Aunt Jemima or somebody like that. It's another story. I mean, I could go on and continue about how my grandmother came here in the late 50s with a sense of purpose and 97 cents in their pockets, but all that stuff will be in the book. Will be in the book? Yeah, it'll be in the book. I can't talk about what's going to be in the book. You have to buy it yourself. But at this time, when she started to get involved with public housing, it wasn't real common, like Harry talked about. The people who were supposed to be advocating for public housing weren't from public housing, so they didn't really have a sense of what needed to happen. And if you ever sit down and talk to my grandmother now, she'll still tell you the same things as far as nobody else can tell you what you're going to need. You have to be in a position to tell them so that they can help you. That's what real advocacy is about. Trying to get your attention, Grandma. And let me say this. This journey took off around 1966 in Orchard Gardens. Orchard Park. Oh, Orchard Park, now referred to as Orchard. Let me put my glasses on.
Careful.
There we go.
Careful.
I don't want none of that. Orchard Park. Orchard Park. I mean, I actually remember living in Batan Court, you know, when I was in my other grandmother in Corregidor Court. There you go, Mom. But back then, you had a real sense of community. I remember sweeping the hallways, having a turn, and then somebody else would be mopping the hallways, and there was little plant things in the outside. Each floor had a week, you know, and that's what the pride was. That's when it was instilled. A matter of fact, I still do that now in the apartment I live in. My neighbors, they don't understand why I get out and do that, because the seed was been planted. And I recognize how important it is. And if I can show them, kind of like she showed me, you know, that's how this works. But I know that her journey really didn't start there. There was a man named Ellis Ash that she'll always refer to. Ellis Ash was the interim manager at the Housing Authority way back before my time. And he had gotten some federal money, and he had sent out letters to all the tenants in every development asking them to come to a meeting in their development. And the reason this is important is because this is how my grandmother thinks also. So when they reached the meeting, there were 4 sign-up sheets. One was who was going to handle the leasing piece, who was going to discuss the management piece, who was going to deal with the maintenance, and who was going to sign up for the physical upgrades. So everybody was invested in their community. That's how my grandmother thinks about tenants empowering themselves. And she's always been like that. A lot of people talked about reaching out to her and her having answers. Usually her answer is going to revolve around, what can you do to help you? Because then she'll help you if you want to do something to help yourself. You know what I mean? And so in that, I mean, Harry took half my speech. So all that stuff about she joined the board in Orchard Park, and then there was a city board of a couple, and then there was another board after that. And it's stuff like this, when it happens in your life, it's just natural ascension. It's nothing that you raise your hand and you sign up for. It's just the course of events in your life dictate that if you want to help, this is what you do. You know, and as I watched my grandmother's life and seen her go through all these processes and all that Kevin White stuff and the FBI coming over to the house, going through stuff with a fine-tooth comb, I got to say this right here. And I used to have a hard time with this when I was in high school. My grandmother is the fairest person I've ever met in my life. And just like Harry talked about, I used to sit down and try to explain to her a story for 45 minutes. And at the end of the story, she's going to ask 3 questions to cut through all that BS. Get down to the nitty-gritty. I used to say that if I ever went on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I got to my last lifeline, and I didn't have the answer to the question, I'm calling my grandmother. So I want to win the money, you know what I mean? I just want to say this right here. There are many people that I've met because of my grandmother, you know, good and bad, you know what I mean? But as I've watched her struggle, and I've watched what she's doing in her life, and I think Anna said it perfectly, the struggle's not over. Really, the foundation has been laid for the generation now, and I say that because, you know, the mayor's gone, so I can say this, I guess. Through all these elections that are happening in the city, when the people that are going to represent us don't reach out to the people that have been here that laid the path before so that they can get some history and understand how this thing is really working or how it should work and where our goals need to be, it's almost shame on them. I think in this country right now, we all realize that we have a responsibility that the next time that there's an election, we will all participate and pay attention to the fullest. If we thought that we didn't have to before, I think we realize it now. So, I'm gonna end with this. I saw Ray Flynn in Elliott Congregational Church last month, and I went and reintroduced myself to him. I said, "Hey, how are you?" He said, "Hi, how are you?" I said, "I'm Bernard. I'm Doris Buntè's grandson." The first thing he said to me is my greatest political appointment. And so when people feel like that about you, and he didn't have to say that. That's right. That was the first thing that he said. That lets me know. You know, many people are born in other places and have other families and born into great families. I cannot fathom the fact that I am born into the family that I am, and I am truly grateful. Listen, I'm the favorite because I'm the oldest. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that, and I understand that. She's guided me every step of my life, my grandmother. She guides me and my mother all the time. There's the three of us. You know what I mean? I'm gonna say this last thing, and I'm gonna sit down. I know this right here. When it's all said and done, and buildings are nice, Mel said a wing in a school. That Roxbury Community College story, there's more to it with the whole Tommy McGee thing. I've heard that story. You gotta buy the book. But anyway, when it's all said and done, and she goes and sees Trudy and Auntie Charlotte again, I honestly believe, and my grandmother says this all the time, there's two questions. One, what you did to the people, and what you did for the people. And hopefully, what you did for the people is a lot longer list than what you did to the people. I love you, Grandma.
Okay. Thank you, Bernard. Well said. Before I introduce our guest of honor, I do want to recognize a few other folks. I just noticed former Representative Charlotte Coleridge is here. Please, a warm round of applause. And Councilor Ayanna Presley has joined us. Is she? Here we are, the guest of honor. This is one of my favorite days in my almost 40 years at the BHA. To be able to participate in honoring this great woman touches me deeply. A little bit of the reason why I actually chose this building. One, Bernard has already mentioned it. Her mom lived here, I think circa 1970. She was one of the first folks, one of the first elderly folks to move in here. And Doris used to visit her frequently, and the elevators were often broken, unfortunately, back in those days. She's going to talk about that, okay. I have no doubt she's going to talk about that. In addition, it is the tallest building in the BHA portfolio in recognition of someone who has stood so tall on behalf of the public housing residents of the city. We will not see her like again. She has been the staunchest, loyalist advocate for the public housing community in this great city in our entire 80-year history. Please, a warm welcome for my dear friend, our dear friend, Doris Buntè.
Thank you so much. It's stuck.
Yep, put up a little bit.
It's working fine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You can hear.
Okay, I'm gonna start out standing. At some point, I may have to sit. First, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Bill McGonigal. And you know, there are some things that you should know about Bill, too. And it's the reason we're such good friends. Bill has made a commitment to the residents in public housing that to the extent that he has to do redevelopment, if there are 100 or 800 low-income units in the housing development that he's redeveloping, that there'll be that same 100 or 800 units when he finishes. There is not a one-for-one replacement commitment by anyone else in the city of Boston but Bill McGonigal. Now, he may have to build a lot of market rate housing to pay for it, because as you know, there's no money coming from Washington. But you have to give Bill credit. One-for-one replacement, it's the only game in town, and he's it. Thank you. I want to thank all the speakers for your kind words. I am really humbled by the things that you said, and I'm so grateful for today, and I'm so grateful for all of you coming out today. I want to acknowledge the elected officials. I want to acknowledge my family, committee town woman, my daughter, Ms. Yvette Johnson. Stand up. My grandson you've met, and he's a one of a kind. I have great-grandchildren here. Where are my great-grandchildren? There's one. Where's the others? Okay. I have a great-great-grandchild here. But the one that towers over me is in school where he needs to be. I was gonna write a speech, and I decided I really didn't want to write a speech. So I'm just gonna tell you a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank some people from the Housing Authority. My friend, the person who has my back, Greg Davis.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what would you do without a Greg Davis? Everyone should have one. Good man. I wanted to thank, where's Kate?
She's right there.
Kate Bennett. Thank you. Lydia. Is Lydia here? Okay, thank you, Lydia. Mark Harris. Okay. There are so many other people that I'd like to thank individually, but it's not going to make sense. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit. I've always been fascinated with words, and so I want to talk a little bit about some words. When Bill came to see me to talk to me about the possibility of today, I had not been in this building in quite some time. And when I think about the amount of time I've spent in this building, I thought that was really sad that I had not been here. And so he told me, go back and see and tell me what you think. And it was interesting because I came here and I saw a couple of tenants, and one tenant said, "Are you the one they're going to name the building after?" Well, you should remember me, because you used to know my cousin. And she told me her cousin's name, and of course I didn't know her, but what can I say? But while I was here, I met a young girl when I was outside. And I'm assuming she's a teenager. And she said, "Can poor people move in this building?" And it was with great pride that I said yes. That's who this building is for. This building is for seniors and disabled people who have limited income. That's what the building is for, the most vulnerable portion of the population. And that's who this building will serve. How could I not be honored to have this building named after me? So a couple of weeks later, I ran into a young man who used to work here in the elderly, and I asked him what was the condition of the building. Although later I did come and see, obviously, for myself. But it was interesting, his response was, you know how Billy is, he's always looking for money for the elderly. So it's in pretty good shape. And then I met a young woman whose uncle lives here. And I asked her the condition of the building. And this has to do with the way people hear, understand, and interpret the word. And I had asked about the condition of the building. So one told me what Billy provides, and the other one said it's terrible. There's alcohol, there's crime, there's drugs. And then she said, but that's everywhere. So what can I say? And I thought to myself, two different interpretations of what is the condition of the building. This building, of course, has loads of memories. Memories about parties that we've had, birthday celebrations, New Year's Eve, so many, many different things, so much time that I've spent in this building with my mother. And when I came to visit, I went up to the 19th floor where she lived, and I just recalled all of the long talks, all of the many nights that I spent with my mother. What an opportunity. And then, also under memories, I remembered that when John isn't here now, he was here earlier, but when we opened this building, we opened it 19 floors of tenants and one elevator. And the elevator was down quite a bit. And it made my mother uneasy. So when the elevator was down, we walked up. Now I want to tell you a little bit more about that, because if you know me, you know I'm 5 feet tall. And I wore heels, 2-inch heels, that we thought were high heels at the time, and that we were cute in them. And so we had our 2-inch heels. And I mean, I wore my 2-inch heels to the mailbox. I didn't go anywhere without my 2-inch heels. So the elevator's down. I have to go see my mother. And so I go with my heels on and my purse on my shoulder and my coat on. And after the first 3 floors, I take off the heels and I hang them on my finger. And 2 or 3 more flights later, I take off the coat, put it on my hand, on my arm, and then later I take off 2 or 3 more flights later. I take off the purse off my shoulder and hook it on my hand. By the time I get to the 19th floor, I am not only not well dressed, I am barely dressed. But that's the way that was back then. Of course, there are 2 elevators now. In any event, being in this building and having put my mother in this building was something that I did consciously. It was a beautiful building. It was a wonderful opportunity for my mother and for other people's parents who came here. And at that time, disabled people weren't allowed in senior buildings, and so it was all seniors. I housed her, and it caused some commotion. Boy, did it cause some commotion. The news media was all over that story. And I remember waking up one morning, and I don't remember if it was the Globe or the Herald, but in huge letters on the front page, it said, "Buntè houses mother." And it was meant to be a form of condemnation because I housed her. And I'll share this with you. Until today, I consider that memory a badge of honor. I want to do one more word. Poor. I have a friend who says, when he speaks of poor people, oh, we're talking about people with inadequate financial resources. And I have another friend, and when he talks about poor people, he says, just remember, and I'm going to say this twice because I'm going to end with this. Being poor is not the result of a flaw in character. Being poor is not the result of a flaw in character. You know, Bill, I thank you. I'm honored. I thank you all for sharing this moment with me, this important moment for me, and I am so grateful. Thank you.